From Bloomberg Quick Take, I'm Renita Young, and this is Your Money Story. Now, it's February, it's Black History Month, and today I want to introduce you to Ross Mack. He's the Wall Street rapper who hosts Macconomics on Revolt TV, and we're going to talk about creating generational wealth in the Black community. Ross, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I love this conversation we're getting ready to have.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's jump right into it. You're another kid from Chicago. You grew up in the South Shore neighborhood, very close to where First Lady Michelle Obama grew up at, and you went to her high school. Tell me how you became aware of financial literacy. Was it a general conversation growing up at home?
I will say, coming from the South Side, no one is thinking about financial literacy. It's something that you don't understand until you're exposed to different backgrounds, right? And I think one of the biggest things when you think about kind of the wealth gap in the community, it's also a exposure gap, right? And the reason I say that is because you're never thinking about investing in the stock market until you're exposed to that. My first time truly getting exposed to it was when I was 18 years old at UPenn, right, in a Wharton class, and a kid sitting next to me was day trading in the middle of econ class. And so when you're starting to think about the different levels of exposure, that's what I find to be so important, to try to get people more exposed to it. But coming from the South Side, you're truly not thinking about it. The most you're thinking about is saving. I think, grandparents and parents might instill in some of the children to this day is you need to save money. But no one truly understands, that saving is still technically losing money due to the rise in inflation every year. So, no one is truly thinking about that.
You're absolutely right. And let's jump into this experience you've had that brought you to Revolt eventually, to host Macconomics, but you studied at some of the world-renowned institutions and worked at some of them. Tell us the journey there, how you started to learn.
No, that's an awesome question. So my journey that helped me say I needed to find, my true passion with helping other people get to financial literacy was purely me being submerged in a culture that I felt as though at first was actually a culture shock. And that being going to UPenn, a school that at the time I want to say was maybe 7% African-American. And one of the things that I took away was that there are different levels to wealth in this country. And I think, going into it, coming from the South Side of Chicago, my idea of what rich was was obviously not the exact same thing. And so as I continue to be submerged in the culture, I ended up, being very lucky, being part of Morgan Stanley's Richard B. Fisher program that allowed me to intern my freshman summer. And so every summer of college, while some of my best friends would be at home, back in Chicago, I would only be able to come home for call it a week or two before I would be off to living in New York and interning. And it was there where, you start to understand different ways of life and different ways of thinking when it comes to actually building and accumulating wealth. And so for me, one of the biggest needs was saying, how can I find a better way, coming from the South Side of Chicago, now being a person that I consider to be lucky to actually be exposed to different levels of wealth, and more importantly, different levels of thinking, especially when it comes to the actual wealth accumulation conversation. And so for me, it was, how can I instantly bring my own life experiences back to the community that I come from? Because if I knew what I know now, life would be completely different. And I would say the same for the majority of inner cities, right? I think if parents understood, different ways of investing, different forms of life insurance or things of that sort, I think, the conversations would be a lot better. If people better understood budgeting, I think the overall financial, the overall financial health in certain communities would be a lot better.
Absolutely. When you lift up communities that have been disproportionately set back for years, hundreds of years, that helps make our country more competitive on the international stage, when you lift up different communities. And so let's keep on that route of the wealth gap. It's been widening over the past 30 years. The St. Louis Fed sent out a report not too long ago that showed this. And so the pandemic exacerbated it. And you have a growing Black Wealth Matters community on social media platforms. I got a chance to listen into one of your clubhouse rooms this past Wednesday, but first, let us know your personal reason as to why Black wealth matters.
Yeah. For me, I think that we had a very trying 2020, not just from a global pandemic standpoint, but from a emotional standpoint, especially after George Floyd's murder, right? And so for me, one of the things that I wanted to do was find a better way of truly walking and living in my purpose. And that purpose is bringing Wall Street to Main Street. And so when you start to think about, the wealth gap, like I say, it's always the information gap. And so for me, it is how do we better inform, how do we better educate our community? Because like you say, 2020 was a trying year, but the wealth gap only got larger and larger, where you had the majority of people being unemployed, being Black people, or better yet, people of color, African Americans and Mexicans or Hispanics. I think one of the things you want to ask yourself is how's that gap able to continue to get wider and wider while the Fed was effectively pumping up the stock market, right? In order to try to spur the economy. Ever since Obama got in office, they've strategically kept interest rates low, which effectively means the stock market is going to continue to grow. Right. But you ask yourself that African Americans own 1% of the stock market. So for me, it is something that I've been trying to champion and try to get our people not only to budget better, not only to start thinking about real estate and other forms of assets to actually pass down for generational wealth, but we have to invest in the stock market, right? One of the conversations I was trying to help inform people was you can't fight the Fed. What's been going on with the Fed is they are effectively inflating in order to pump up America's economy. And what that means is that the stock market is going to continue to grow. So when you think about this past year, the wealth gap got much larger because the government pumped trillions of dollars into the economy, whereas some people got it in the form of stimulus checks, while the vast majority got it in the form of seeing their 401ks, seeing their retirement accounts growing massively, as well as seeing their brokerage accounts growing massively. So for me, it is always a big thing to continue to tell people, listen, we have to start investing. We have to understand that, you're never gonna out earn someone, right? You have to have your money working for you. And so for me, Black Wealth Matters is something that is a fully encompassing way of life of thinking, where it starts with budgeting better, where it starts with paying down debt. And then it's all about thinking about, having that emergency fund for a rainy day. A lot of people saw that, with the lack of job security, especially in this entire country, right? But we saw the people of color actually got laid off first, especially women as well. They got, there's a stat that said, there are more women that were being laid off than men as well. So for me, it's always like fully encompassing, how do we truly build wealth? And one of the avenues is we have to invest in the stock market. I find it that a statistic that by 2053, the actual net worth of African Americans is going to be zero, right? Wow. Literally zero. So for me, my purpose is how can I hopefully push that off, and better yet, never have that stat even come into fruition, right? And so for me, it is all about finding ways to ensure that we are educated on everything, right? When you look at what today is, we're in the most technological savvy generation ever, right? Everyone is able to learn. Information is disseminated on all platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, what have you, right? Obviously, you guys are doing a phenomenal job at Quick Take. But what I say this to say is that we no longer have an excuse, right? Obviously, if you come from a underserved community, chances are your neighborhood schools were underfunded, right? We no longer could have the excuse that our schools aren't teaching us this, because technically speaking, most schools aren't teaching financial literacy, which that's a conversation for another day. I think it needs to be implemented. I want to talk to the CPS president here in Chicago. I want to start implementing something in the schools. But what's happening is that, other community groups are having conversations at the dinner room table, right? Other community groups are being able to benefit from their grandparents passing away and leaving a life insurance policy. Other groups are being able to benefit from the fact that their grandparents and their parents have property that they're also able to inherit, right? In areas that once were not redlined. So therefore, those property values are also increasing. So for me, Black Wealth Matters is a movement which is truly predicated on a fully encompassing plan of helping people become more educated about the different avenues to grow their wealth.
Brilliantly said. Brilliantly said. And before we get into more of your very practical ways that the Black community can start this, I was listening in on the Clubhouse this past Wednesday. You do Black Wealth Wednesdays. You take questions from people. You give investment advice. So do your moderators. And you and another moderator were talking about building generational wealth for Black people for the next 200 years. Before we get into how, can you just explain to us what that kind of a mindset does for one's confidence and how it can change the trajectory of their lives?
Absolutely. There's a actual, scientific understanding of that, having money problems is negatively correlated with your happiness. Right. And so I think the moment people become financially free, their lives, I believe their lifespan will be longer, and I believe they will live a more fulfilling life. Right. And so when it comes to actually building generational wealth, it is the ability to pass on assets to the next generation. Right. And I think the way you start thinking about that is thinking not short term, but long term. Right. And I think that when you start thinking about the buying power of the Black community, right, wrapped around $2 trillion annually, you start asking yourself, if we were spending that money in the right places, what would that do for the next generations to come? And that's kind of where I try to stand in, right? Try to fill in that gap, that information gap. Where should you be spending that money? And I'm gonna actually take that a step back, not necessarily even spending that money. What should you be investing that money? And that's how we're thinking about, building that generational wealth. And I think, people aren't educated on, certain of these conversations, right? I think at the end of the day, I went to some of the best schools that I would say, right? But I still don't necessarily need to know what an isosceles triangle is, but I definitely want to know. I should have learned how to buy a home. I should have learned the importance of actually having a retirement, right? When you start thinking about people constantly working in public service or something like that until they're past their 70s, it's something that is a problem in our entire country. And so for me, it's always about finding ways to help people start thinking about generational wealth. And you start with, like I say, one of the basic forms is just having life insurance. You'll be surprised the earlier you start how cheap it can be to actually cover you and your family. When you look up, it'll probably be the same price as having, Spotify, Apple Music, and Netflix, right? And you start thinking about it. It could be literally maybe 3 drinks at a nightclub, right? And everyone's already spending money on, things that is not actually bringing them any true value full term, right? And that's what it's always about, helping people put things into perspective to actually think about building generational wealth for their children and their children's children.
Absolutely. And if you've just tuned in, you are watching Your Money Story on Quick Take. I'm Renita Young, and this is Ross Mack, the Wall Street rapper, Wharton alum, Morgan Stanley alum, who now hosts Macconomics on Revolt TV. We're talking about creating generational wealth in the Black community. Ross, give us your 3 practical tips on how the Black community can begin building generational wealth.
Phenomenally said, right? How can, the Black community start building generational wealth? I think, once again, it's a fully encompassing way of life of thinking. But I think, practically thinking, I think everyone should start better budgeting. I think budgeting gives you a better outlook on helping you reach your goals and making sure that you are not left holding the bag anytime a unforeseen, expenses coming, some expense comes to your life, right? At the end of the day, I want to say about 70% of people don't have $1,000 saved in their bank account. And that's Americans. That's not a Black, white, or Hispanic problem. That is an American problem, right? And so for me, it's like, I think people need to start off budgeting better. Because a lot of people live out of their means. When I say budgeting, I have a free downloadable worksheet that you can literally use, download it to your computer. You can use it because it will help you start tracking your necessary expenses, which I believe from your take home pay, you shouldn't be spending more than 50% on. And that is, call it housing, food, food, shelter, obviously, whether it's mortgage or rent, as well as different, forms of insurance or things of that sort. And then next, with the remaining 50%, you should have roughly like 30% going towards the things that you want to do, whether that's, entertainment or, dining out or anything, traveling or anything like that. And then the 20% should be built towards saving, paying down debt, as well as investing, right? And so I think that for every person is going to be situationally, but you need to kind of pivot and shift, towards different, percentages, but especially in a time if you're not in a position of having true job security, it might be 50-50. You might not even need once, right? You might truly be saying, let me build up my emergency fund, which is 3 to 6 months of your necessary expenses. And that way you're going to be better off, right? You're not living paycheck to paycheck because you now have a 6-month cushion. Especially if you have children, you want to start having that cushion. And then next, I think we need to start thinking about investing. It is something that, it's the only way, I believe, to truly start helping people allow their money to make money. I think in this society, we're taught to work hard for money, but we're never truly taught that our money could work even harder for us. And, and I understand, I think that, when it's all said and done, one thing that a lot of people aren't, and it could be, rightfully so, but a lot of, people of color are less inclined to want to invest their money in the stock market because they can't see their money. They don't know what's going on. They heard one bad story, but the reality is the stock market, and I'm say the S&P 500 is indicative of that. It's growing 10% annually on average, right? And so to give you an idea, you can make $1 million purely putting $250 in every month into the S&P 500. I tell people that, but one thing that they don't understand is, well, I want to get rich quickly. Right. You don't. A lot of people don't have the foresight and the ability to be, kind of long sighted to actually say, OK, I want to be very disciplined and make money in the long term. Right. And so people need to invest, whether it's in your brokerage account, whether it's in your, your child's custodial account or your 401k or Roth IRA. And I think maybe the last one, so we said budgeting and investing. You don't mind if I do 2 more, right? Because I think
go ahead.
I think every family who has someone that depends on them needs life insurance, because it is, I believe, one of the easiest ways that allows you to truly build generational wealth and pass it on to the next generation, right? No one wants to think about their untimely demise, but that's the only thing that's sure in this world, right? We all are going to pass on at some point. Wouldn't it be amazing to pass on and not have your family have to do a GoFundMe for your funeral expenses? Wouldn't it be nice to, because when you think about it, it's going to cause emotional stress on your family when you pass away, but it should not also cause financial stress on your family when you pass away. And so having life insurance, whether it's, a $40 a month plan or $60 a month plan, at the end of the day, everyone finds time to do what they want to do, and everybody can effectively budget for certain expenses in their life. And, life insurance is one of them. And I think the fourth one that I want to say is truly investing for your children. One terrible stat is I want to say the average American has like $50,000 in debt. And I want to say the average college student is graduating with about $30,000 in student loans. One of the greatest gifts to give your child is the ability not to incur student loans. And, one way to think about that is a 529 account. It's effectively called it like a Roth IRA. It allows you to put after-tax money into an account, that being a 529 account. That money is now invested into the stock market. It's going to be in mutual funds. That money is going to grow tax-free. You're going to be able to take that money out tax-free, and you're going to be able to utilize that money for your child. So literally putting $100 in a month, you're going to have, call it maybe over $70K in 18 years for your child, maybe even more, right? Depending on, what your investments are. And I think that's something that people need to establish for their children. And lastly, in that same realm of helping plan for your child's future, a custodial account. I think a custodial account is very important. It is just a brokerage account for your child, right? It gives them the ability to, start learning about money, start learning about the things that are important. And one of them is truly investing. And that's how you build for the future. That's how you build generational wealth. Absolutely. And you said also that you and your wife are doing the same for your 4-month-old daughter. She has a custodial account. So this is how you build generational wealth.
And if you are just tuning in, this is Your Money Story on Quick Take. This is Ross Mack. We're talking to the Wall Street rapper and the host of Revolt TV's Maconomics, who wants to what, Ross?
I want to help you get to the bag.
That's right. Now, we do have a quick question from the audience. One person asks, should I start investing in stocks now during the pandemic? What do you say, Ross?
I think that's a great question. And, one thing that I always say, give a disclaimer, definitely check with maybe a registered advisor or something. But I think the questions you want to ask yourself before you start investing, because the short answer is yes, but, the long-winded answer is it depends. And so assuming that you have an emergency fund set up, assuming that you don't have any debt, the answer is absolutely. And the reason I say that is because when you start investing, you need to think about being a long-term investor. The stat that I told you was that over the long course of time, the stock market, the S&P 500 is going to get you a 10% return. Understand why that's important is because your money is more than likely in your savings/checkings account that is maybe getting you 0.06% return. So understand that you want to find a way to actually start allowing your money to make money for you. But even more important is by only having your money in a savings/checking account, you're not even outpacing inflation, right? When you think about inflation, that's something that you might not necessarily know the actual concept, but you definitely understand it, because when you could go to your corner store as a kid with $1, you could probably leave out with a handful of goods, right? You had quarter bags of chips, gum was a quarter, 50-cent juices, or 50-cent honey buns or whatnot. Reality is now you take that same dollar to your corner store, you're getting a 79-cent bag, maybe a 10, 15-cent bag to put it in, right? Like that's right. That's the power of inflation, right? Your rent is higher, gas is higher than it was when your parents were younger. That's inflation. The cost of living goes up every year, 2 to 3% annually. So therefore, you want to find a way to at least keep pace or outpace inflation. And so, just coming back full circle, to the question of should you start investing? And the reason I say you don't want to have debt. Let's talk about the different types of debt, right? At the end of the day, like I say, the average return is 10%. So it does not make sense if you have credit card debt that you're paying 18 to 22% on. Reason being, it doesn't make sense, because if you're investing in the stock market to get 10%, but yet you're still paying 22% on your credit cards, that's the type of debt that I don't want you to have. You can have a mortgage, you can have, you can have mortgage, you can have certain student loans or something like that. But, the idea is, you want to get rid of bad debt before you start investing, because you don't want to be stuck with paying 20% while you're only effectively making 10%.
Well put again. And so on that note, you say long-term investing is the way to go, but we saw a whole lot of short-term investors get into the game last week with GameStop Mania. First, can you please give us your assessment of what happened there?
Amazing question. What happened with the GameStop Mania? In short, to kind of educate people watching right now, it was a very well orchestrated trading that incurred. So to take it back a few seconds, what is shorting? You had some companies, some hedge funds, the biggest name would have been Melvin Capital. What you had was them saying, I want to bet against GameStop. I believe the stock of GameStop is going to continue to go down. So the way they would actually do that, they would call their broker, effectively like their bank. They would call their broker and they would say, hey, I want to short GameStop. Their broker would say, sure, okay. And we'll just continue to say Melvin Capital. So Melvin Capital would say, by the way I'm going to short, in order to short, they would have to borrow the shares. They would then immediately sell it to someone else with the expectation that the price goes down. And the way they kind of make good on that is they go out and then they buy GameStop shares that are cheaper. They then deliver those shares back and they kind of take the difference, right? So if GameStop is trading at $20, they will borrow it, sell it to, person B. The stock goes down to $10. They go buy the stock back at $10 and they make that kind of $10 difference because they borrowed it at 20 and they give it back at $10, right? That's effectively how that works. And so what ended up happening was that GameStop had, call it almost like a concert that has only 100 seats. You had people selling 140 seats for a concert that only had 100 seats. So in other words, they had 140% of their actual, they only had 100 shares. Well, they had people betting against 140 of those. So in other words, they had 140% short. So the reason I say it was well orchestrated is because you had a very powerful Reddit channel called Wall Street Bets who got privy to that. And they said, guys, if we all buy GameStop right now, that's going to force, these hedge funds. And once again, we can consider this being Melvin Capital. That's going to force them to actually have to go out and buy it back because their broker is going to call Melvin Capital like, hey, buddy, you borrowed this at 20, now it's $40. I need you to kind of pay it back, right? That's what you call a margin call, right? They're either gonna require them to give me the shares back that you borrowed or put up more capital, right, for collateral. And instead, what ended up happening is companies that were short, like Melvin Capital, maybe Centron as well, they were forced to go out to the public market and buy back the stock. And what ended up happening, GameStop obviously is a company that was obviously on a deterioration, right? It was going down. But what ended up happening, there was a technical in the market that made people have to buy the stock, right? And like I say, in order for Melvin Capital to make good with, their bank, they had to buy the stock. So the stock went from $40 to $80, $200, $300, $400. And the reason is because Melvin Capital had to buy it. You had people that were forced buyers because, and this is what you call a short squeeze, right? The people that were short, their banks called them and they said, hey, you have to buy these stocks back. You have to deliver these stocks back, right? And that's what you call a short squeeze. And what made this story even more complex or even convoluted was the fact that Melvin Capital ended up almost going out of business because they lost so much money on this trade. So they ended up getting bailed out by one particular hedge fund in particular, and that is being Citadel. Now, this is when the story gets a little more interesting because Citadel, what was synonymous with the Reddit traders, the Wall Street Bets, is everyone technically were using the Robinhood platform, right? And so it's when it comes to like a little triangle, like a love triangle, right? So what ended up happening, you had Melvin Capital being outsmarted technically, technically by the Reddit traders who were all using Robinhood. Then you had Citadel who bailed out Melvin Capital. But here's the thing, Citadel is also one of the largest clients of Robinhood. So Citadel bailed out Melvin Capital. Melvin Capital were losing at the expense of the Reddit traders that were using Robinhood. But Robinhood technically gets their money from Citadel when you think about it. So what ended up happening, what made this very, very complex or made its way to the news, so to speak. You had AOC and Ted Cruz talking about it, was that Robinhood effectively tied the hands of the investors. And they said, hey, everyone on Robinhood, you no longer can buy this stock. You can only sell. So everyone understands supply-demand dynamics. And what ended up happening was everyone technically were if people were only allowed to sell, that means the stock had to go down. So it went from 400 to quickly 300, 200. And that's because no one could ever buy the stock anymore. If no one can buy it, you can't support the market. Therefore, the price has to go down. And so as the price was going down, you had Ted Cruz, AOC, and other people coming out speaking, whether it was Elon or other people coming out speaking. They were literally saying this is unfair. The market is rigged. And what ended up happening is that a lot of people, unfortunately, that got into the Robinhood mania, who didn't truly understand the risk associated with it, lost a lot of money because they were buying it. Oh, it's going to 200, it's going to 300, and they're buying it there. And Robinhood made it so that you no longer could buy the stock. Therefore, the stock price actually went down.
That's true. And so as a result, Robinhood is facing at least 30 lawsuits for stopping people from buying stocks. Now, what's your thought about that? Is this hampering the Main Street guy, the little guy, the everyday person? Is it really fair to the everyday person who's really trying to come up?
Yeah, I think when you think about, what Robinhood actually did, and you asked the question, surrounding the legality as well as the fairness, it's a very, that's one of those, my opinion really isn't going to matter. My opinion was they should have allowed everyone to continue to trade. But what ended up happening was that effectively Robinhood also could have went out of business because, their clearinghouses required them to put up more capital because there was so much volume going on, so much volatility in the stock. At the end of the day, when we buy a stock, we don't understand, but we technically don't get that stock until 2 days, right? And so what ended up happening is that Robinhood or whoever's our broker, they are technically holding that stock for us. And so it doesn't clear into 2 days. And so the clearinghouses effectively told Robinhood, hey, you need to be more capitalized, right? And I think that what's going to come out of this is, like I say, I don't believe Robinhood should have did this. They should have found a way to make it work some way, somehow, because what ended up happening is everyone was left with a bad taste in their mouth. And when you have GameStop and AMC and Nokia, BlackBerry or whatnot, those prices going up 200% coming down 70-80% the next day, that's problematic, especially when you're tying the hands of your investors, your people that are using Robinhood, saying you can't buy it. Then the next day, okay, you can buy it, but you can only buy one share. And that's very problematic, because now you have the big guys that are just selling, and they're making money as the stock goes down. And so that's going to be problematic. They're definitely going to have to go before the Senate, and they're going to have to pay some probably hefty fines. But what's going to come out of this is that, brokerage firms are going to have to be better capitalized moving forward. In short, I think there was something that was very unfortunate and definitely left a lot of people holding the bag. But that goes to show, that's what learning how to invest the right way could have actually helped, people avoid this, because, you want to buy great companies that are going to be here for the next 5-10 years, and you hold those guys for life. And that's kind of the biggest life lesson, right? I just saw on the news earlier or on social media, but a young man, took his life because he lost about 185,000 in this whole GameStop phenomenon. And it's something that, the class, the class action lawsuits are going to continue to get bigger. So I think that it's all said and done, that, what could have avoided that is Robinhood being better capitalized, Robinhood still allowing people to buy and sell. That way they just kind of remove themselves from that equation and let the actual market itself play out. But because they made it so that they couldn't buy, they kind of made it look like they were tampering with the market.
Okay. You know what? On that note about the Reddit traders, do you know anything about the demographics of who was trading within the Reddit group? Do you have any buddies who were also included?
Yeah, I definitely have buddies that were in it, without a doubt. I have a investment club where people were telling me, hey, should I buy? And I was telling them, I would recommend staying away from it. And one of the things that I help the people that are in my Maconomics investment club is, look, I share my screen. Let's go through the 10K right now, right? That is the annual filing that, GameStop has to file every year, right? And I said, let's look at this business. Let's look at their top line sales. Let's look at their revenue. Do we believe that GameStop should be up this high purely based on maybe the sales of the Xbox and PlayStation 5 consoles? Probably not, right? And so what we ended up doing was we truly valued the company and said this company is not at one point it was a $30 billion valuation company. And I told them, absolutely not. I don't recommend you guys buying it. And so what ended up happening is the people that were in this Reddit channel were people that were effectively buying it, purely based on what someone else said. Oh, let's all buy it. Let's buy it. Let's hold the line. You had people coming out had people coming out on social media and saying, yo, let's continue to hold it till it gets to 1,000. And, at the end of the day, I do believe there were wolves in sheep clothing who kind of were on both sides, hedge funds that were also on the Reddit channel, maybe helping pump it up, because when it's all said and done, you had a lot of unsophisticated people getting into the stock, not knowing that it was probably a big bubble and it was going to burst, and it happened very quickly.
Okay. Excellent assessment of what happened there. All right. We have another question from the audience. Someone wants to know, how can a non-American venture into investing in the S&P 500?
Great question. I think, a non-American can't own stocks. Can't own American-based stocks. I'm not certain on what country you're at, but at the end of the day, just how I can own Chinese listed companies or African listed companies, whether it's NIO or Jumia, you yourself in whatever country you are able to own American owned companies. I think you just want to check with your local brokerage firms and try to figure out, but to that person, you can own the S&P 500 via, two very common ETFs, a Vanguard one that the ticker is VOO, and another one is SPY. But you would literally ask your broker, how can you own VOO or SPY? And that's going to give you the ability to own in one basket of goods, 500 of America's best performing and larger companies.
Okay. And one more question from the audience. Where do you see the biggest opportunities right now to invest?
Great question. Biggest opportunities to invest are, for me, it's always thinking about long term, 5 to 10 years down the line. And so one of the things you want to think about is, where's the world going to look like? I believe the entire world, everyone's going green. You're seeing by 2035, the vast majority of the world is trying to go green, meaning they're no longer making/selling combustible engines, aka gas powered cars. So the world is going to be electric. You want to own electric cars. You want to own the entire infrastructure of electric cars. So the charging stations, the battery manufacturers, and the actual, natural resource that makes the batteries, that being lithium ion. So you want to look at that entire landscape. You're going to want to also look into semiconductors. You're going to want to also look at, kind of cloud data companies. The list goes on. I think that, if you have any further questions, you could for sure shoot me a text. That's always one great way to get it, to finally learn more about it. 773-232-2577. That's one great way of truly, joining my Maconomics Club. And we literally do a full dive analysis on some of the best sectors to be in for the next 5-10 years.
Okay, thanks for running that down too. I mean, people, you're getting all kinds of investment advice from Ross Mac, the Wall Street rapper, Revolt TV host of Maconomics, who wants to help you
get to that bag.
Okay, and last up, let's round out the conversation. We started out talking about creating generational wealth in the Black community. And so this is not just a responsibility of the people within the community. Ross, you and I talked about this. Tell me how allies can help create generational wealth in the Black community.
Yeah, great question. How can allies help build generational wealth? I think that it boils down to representation on all levels. It boils down to, giving more job opportunities to qualified, people of color. I think that when it's all said and done, we need representation in, kind of the C-suite areas of some of these large corporations. We need better, philanthropic efforts when it comes to helping educate some communities. I think that, simply writing a blank check, just for tax write-off is no longer going to cut it. I think that you probably should try to find better ways to partner with certain organizations. My organization is all about trying to help educate the youth. I talk to several kids every month for that same reason. And I think when it comes to the allies, it's, how do you help create a world that is more fair, whether it's from job opportunities, whether it's from, the ability to generate income, whether it's from banks loaning equally to certain communities, whether it's from certain companies no longer doing predatory lending and, 1,000% interest rate loans to, people in certain communities. I think it's a fully encompassing, thing that needs to occur. But one thing for sure is, equal access to education, equal access to job opportunities, and just trying to have, the world represent, what this country should be. And that's, equality for all. And so I think that's one way allies could truly help, this quest for helping the Black community build true generational wealth.
It sounds like what you're saying, Ross, is use whatever influence you have to help create a way for people of color, for Black people,
Absolutely.
to go to generational wealth. Yeah,
absolutely. You said everything I was trying to say in 5 seconds.
Oh, thank you so much. But hey, listen, I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. This is Ross Mac, everybody, host of Maconomics on Revolt TV. I'm Renita Young. You just watched Your Money Story on Bloomberg Quick Take. Thank you so much and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.